I want you to ask questions and comments and engage. Let there be light, Zora Neale Hurston. Say some things. Oh, yes. And say your first name for me too, so I feel like I'm not just, because if I could get closer, I would. Thank you. And all questions are good questions.
Oh, that's right. My name is John, and
Hi, John.
I'm going to address you as Professor Finney.
Oh my God, you don't have to, but thanks. I sound important.
Well, you're very important to my daughter, who was your student
Oh.
last semester.
Oh, okay. Who's your daughter?
Kat.
Oh, yeah. Oh my God, she's fabulous. I'm not just saying that. She is fabulous.
But what I want to say is that you're a very profound teacher in the way that you give of yourself and expect your other students to get out of their academic mindset and be human and personable and engage in their story of origin and confront the world as it is now.
Well, thank you for saying that. And partly why I do this, I say to folks, we're whole people. We're not part people, right? So, and in academic settings, we privilege the intellect. And there are so many ways to know the world, right? Emotional intelligence, spirit, dream world, our physical selves. There's so many ways we know the world. Only a small portion of people actually get to go to college. In this world, most people do not, which doesn't mean they know less, and maybe they even know more. We could make that argument. So for me, part of the reason I do that is how do you understand your whole self as having something to bring to the table? How can we get creative about that? Which means if we get good about that with ourselves, we can also make space for that for somebody else to do the same. But I'm so glad she had good things to say. It's excellent. Come on, don't be shy. This is it. Ask me a question. I'm going to start pointing and stuff. Professor Finney will start pointing. It always takes a couple. All questions are good. Comments are good. You don't have to agree. You got something to say. I know you got something to say. Hi.
Hi, my name is Molly.
Molly.
Yeah. I first of all want to say thank you for coming over and giving us this talk. I really appreciate it. And John, thanks for the invitation. My son would have come with me tonight, but he's working and he couldn't be here. But my interest as a resident of the area, which is one of a handful, I'm interested in such learning to not just be limited among us as parents, but how can we expand this so that the young ones who are not here can be a part of this conversation? Because in probably 20 years, 30 years, most of us who are here will be on the other side. But
thank you for that reminder.
Well, I tend to be blunt as.
It's okay.
So we will be on the other side in 30, 40 years, 50 years. But they will be left with the work to be done, because this is a work that's not going to be ending after this conversation. I believe that this is just a beginning of the conversation in this space. But how can we include the ones that are not here, the young ones, to be a part of this conversation and extend it and then, kind of take it forward?
Thank you.
This may be to you and to John as well.
Yeah. That's a great question. So I have a couple things to say in no apparent order. Because I do this, and really, when I say this to you, for about 6 years, before this, I was on a plane most weeks. I might be teaching a couple of classes and then I'm on a plane. Wide variety of conversation groups, predominantly white environmental groups, institutions, museums, sometimes some folks of color mixed up in there. When all of this stuff went down, I'm not going anywhere, and I'm working way more than before. So it's every day, multiple things a day in multiple formats, including businesses, outdoor retailing businesses. Now it goes all over the place. But I spend some of that is talking to younger people. So I don't even know what day I'm in. Earlier this week, it was a group called the Latino Heritage Group. Young Latinx folks working with the Park Service and other outdoor organizations between the ages of 18 and 30. The week before that, it was HBCU, Historical Black College, and universities interns. Also, everybody was under 25. And so for me, I see that happening. In terms of what you might think about that you don't already think about, I can't make that assumption you don't think about it. I will say, as somebody who looked like me and was young, I knew what was going on. And when I knew and was young, there was no social media. There was no, there was 6 channels on the TV or whatever. And I still knew what was going on. In part, one, because I looked like I looked, and I was in the spaces I was in. So I'm not saying you're saying this, and I just want to remind us that they may know way more than we do about what's actually happening and what it looks like on the ground, because they're contending with it every day. And so part of it for me is how to make their lived experience, how to make us recognize that their lived experience has value as it is, right? So, because it's always like starting with where people are so they can wholly show up as they are, right? And knowing that the experience of looking at a lot of younger folks are the ones who are protesting out in the street, who are on the front lines. That's mostly folks under 30, right, for a variety of reasons. So they are already doing it. I guess I would also say, in terms of the relationship between older people and younger people, what are the conversations that are being had? Are there intentional gatherings that are intentional, for younger and older people to come together and have that conversation? I'm in some kind of, in my own head, I actually know that I'm in denial about my own age, right? There's so many reasons for that. And I have led a fairly non-traditional life. So I don't have kids. I run around the world like a bohemian, I don't know what, doing what I'm doing in a very particular way, and I feel privileged to be able to do it, but I know it's not what it is. But I also engage with so many different people because of that. What do those conversations look like? How are they, and here's something I want to say, you got me. Sometimes it takes me a minute to get there, is having sat on a number of boards who are with really good people, who are thoughtful and talk about young people, and I never see a single young person sitting on the board. And please don't hire just one, ask 2, at least. Have young people actually engaged. It's a learning experience. When I joined the National Parks Advisory Board, that was in First, I did something called the Second Century Commission, and for a year there was funding. They asked all of these well-established people, which I was not at the time. I was an older student, but I certainly wasn't well-established. So Sandra Day O'Connor and Sally Jewell, who was CEO of REI at the time, and Maria Hinojosa, all these people, John Fahey, National Geographic, all these people for us to think about for a year what the national parks should be looking at in order for the national parks to be relevant. I was so intimidated, and I talk a lot, but I was so intimidated. I remember sitting next to Sandra Day O'Connor and going, I can't believe I'm sitting next to Sandra Day O'Connor, or like, what's happening right now, and not saying very much. The funny thing is, at one point, we met 5 times. We did 3-day retreats 5 times at 5 different national parks around the country that year. After a while, I started to get comfortable, and people started talking about the youth. And finally, I raised my hand and went, there isn't any youth around this table. I believe I'm the youngest one. They said, well, we thought when we hired you, we asked you were the youth. I was 47 at the time. I was like, I know I look good, but... And I just cracked up, and they meant it, right? So what does that mean to think differently about the way boards are organized and how youth can play an advisory role or engage? And that's also how they learn. I really, for me, the generational conversation makes me really uncomfortable, this idea when people say, it's on their shoulders, they're going to be the ones to fix it. You know what? Older people have been saying that about younger people since the beginning of time. You know what? It's on everybody's shoulder, and it's about relationship. No wonder some young people are going, I don't want this. I didn't ask for this. It's about relationship. And the idea we treat older people as though they have nothing left to offer. There's so many things we lose every single time. So what does it mean to just change the languaging of understanding, of saying that it's not about that young person to fix it, but together what the 2 of you might come up with to think about what is their experience right now? What does that look like? What was your experience? And what is your experience right now? And how do we give relevance to both those things? It doesn't have to be one or the other. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I can just say it out loud. Only because it's layering on to Molly's question.
Yeah.
Is there, does it get more complicated in family?
Baby, you know it's true. So you knew the answer to that before you asked it.
I guess I'm asking for, do you have thoughts about that?
Yes. Yes, I do. So I told you about my family and the fact that I was adopted. So my parents are African American, though they both have white relatives, they have Native relatives, they know where they are in their family. You can kind of look, especially at my father, you can see it, and it's, you can see it where they claim is African American. I mean, that's how they were raised, that's how they were treated, and that's how they kind of show up, right? So my brothers, who are their biological children, are African American, I mean, stem from them. And when I was adopted in New York from Spence Chapin, I was told, New York has some very conservative adoption laws, which make me crazy, which means that as the adoptee, I can find out very little about my biological background. But what I had been told was that my biological parents were African American, that my biological mother was in college and was 17, and my biological grandparents, my grandfather was a physicist for the government, my mother was a home economics teacher, her mother was a home economics. So this black family that at that time, I was born in 59, so really, wow, that's kind of impressive, like they were doing that at that time. And my parents were very open about the fact that I was adopted, which I think was a great thing to be. So it was never like you're like, oh my God, the big secret, except up until I was about 20, every time I would meet someone, I'd say, hi, how you doing? I'm adopted. I had this thing, so that's just messed up. But what I was told was that my biological parents were African American. My parents used to joke, and the extended family, that, of course, my biological mother has to be somebody really famous. So for a long time, it was Diana Ross, it was all this stuff. And actually, up until, I would say, a few years ago, my aunt swore my biological father is Colin Powell. Okay. I decided, because I'm working on the next book and thinking about these issues of identity, to do the DNA. And you all know where I'm going. You know where I'm going? Yes, you do. So I did the DNA, and I got back that information. And first, I didn't really understand it. I was like, 49 or 51% sub-Saharan Southern Africa. And then the other, 49, whatever was left over, was broken down. It was like 34% the British Isles, 8% Scandinavian, 2% East Asian. I was just excited. I was like, I'm global. I love it. But I'm not putting it together until I get the mitochondrial DNA, which then came back, and every little country that was listed was Finland, Scotland, Austria. I was like, I'm confused where the dark country's at, which is clearly telling me that my biological mother is white. Right, so I haven't quite dealt with that information, and I know some of you are looking at me going, oh yeah, that's kind of obvious, look in the mirror, but that's another conversation. So I think, for me, the complication is I have not told my parents what I found, my parents, and for me, my parents are my parents who raised me. Because my dad's got Alzheimer's, my parents are in their late 80s, I don't know how that would serve them. And I know that my father, the issue of race and his anger at white people for so long, you wouldn't know it, my father was the most charming individual, but the way he was inside the home about issues of race was very different than he was outside of the home. And so for me, it becomes complicated in just how do we understand that? What does that mean? I think it becomes complicated with how individuals in any family identify. Right? For many people, family is not something you choose. If we think of traditional family, right? So even, I didn't choose it either, even being adopted into it. You are in a place where hopefully people are caring for you, but they're also injecting you with their values and their point of view based on their subjective experience of the world and their own dreams. And therein lies the first problem. Because as individuals, what happens when you have someone else who comes in who has a different sense of themselves? But you're asking me it for a very particular reason. There's somewhere you want to go, more specifically.
I think think I heard you talking about this generational gap, wherever that may lie.
Yes.
I don't consider myself a youth. I'm in my 40s.
Yes.
But I find the conversations difficult with my family who comes from a different generation.
Yeah. My father, not so much with my mother, but with my father, before he's got early stage dementia. And so when our current president got elected, he would say things like, I really like him. Like, he would say stuff like that. And I knew that's not what he meant. So there's also this kind of, and even before dementia, I would say there's elements of my father that are conservative. So as a black man, if you're black in this country, you're not allowed to be an individual, even though we're in a country that promotes individualism. So as a black man, this is somebody, he walked around, he wore the dashiki in the 60s, he's Black Power. It was all about all that. He's also, he owns so many rifles and guns. The NRA. He's conservative about his perspective about women. Gender roles for him, oh my God, makes me crazy. Yeah, there's just ways in which we just really don't. When I started bringing friends, when I started dating white men, that was a trip. Yeah, I mean, it could have been I was dating anybody, number one. And if they happened to be white, oh boy, I'm really bringing it home. His views on homosexuality, like it's just, and the only reason we're not fighting about it anymore is because he's sort of devolved a little bit into this kind of softer, childlike individual that I can't pick those fights with him anymore. I think, I don't know what to say to you about family. There are issues like there would be with any individuals. And so how are you grounded? How do you learn to practice? It's not about getting them in agreement with you, but what does it mean to make space for their experience while, I'm not a parent, so I can't speak to that, right? But I can understand the impulse to want to protect, and that love and protection looks a very particular way. And what does that mean to make space for something else, another way of viewing and showing up in the world? And I guess, at Thanksgiving or whatever, man, they always say, some conversations you just don't have right then.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Ooh, good one. Yeah. There's two. Oh.
Hi, my name is Fiona.
Hi, Fiona.
And my daughter was a camper, and she was here for many, many years, and very, very happy here, and learned a lot, and learned leadership skills and all that sort of thing. And many of her friends, lifelong friends, she's made here. But she was adopted, black. As a 3-year-old, this is just to give you some comparison about children and race. As a 3-year-old, we live in Hanover, and walking through the gym one day, and a black basketball player stopped to chat with her, and they're having a great conversation. And then she says to him, I'm black too. Yeah. And he roared laughter because he just, and I was like, whoa, that's interesting. And yet, several years later, when she's in school, there were 2 occasions, once with a 2nd grader and once with a 3rd grader and a 4th grader at 2 separate occasions, when they found out that she was adopted. These are children who knew me and my husband and her 2 brothers, all white, and they were absolutely gobsmacked. They grabbed me, one of them grabbed me, dragged me to a corner. Leah is adopted? I mean, that was the horrendous thing for them. And I'm like, yeah, and then another time in a car, a 4th grader said, it came up, and Leah is adopted? I mean, that for them was the huge thing.
Were the people grabbing you white or black?
White.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Or everybody was white. I mean, we did have a black community, but no, these are white children.
Yeah.
Who just show she was very aware of her color.
Yeah.
But clearly, for some reason, they literally didn't see it. She was just who she was. That's just children without any sense of bias or
So, Fiona, thank you for that story. So I want to say to you that when I was in 4th grade and went to public school that was largely Italian-American working class, some African-American kids, some others as well, that from the time from 4th grade pretty much into high school, I was bullied on a regular basis by other black girls. Now, there was, it didn't, my parents and everybody was black. There was no, the issue for me was, it was related to class because I lived up on the hill in that very rich neighborhood, even though we didn't own anything there. My parents worked there, you know. The thing that they would always say to me is, you think you're white. I did well in school. I had white friends. That year is when everything, all my work started to go down the tubes, 4th grade. You know, it seemed so serious at the time. But, you know, and the teacher told my parents, and I got in trouble, and they threatened to send me to the Catholic school. We were raised Methodist. That was around the corner of St. Vito's. That was the threat, unless I got it together, which I did. Because there was no way I could tell my parents, you don't understand, my blackness, my black identity is being challenged. My membership as a black person is being challenged. And guess what? I don't even know what the hell that is. Like, what is my membership, right? So I had a different experience of, and right up to high school. And it didn't stop until there was a small group of these black kids. And every time, I got called the N-word by them, not by the white kids. And by the time I hit about junior and senior, I'd had enough. And I remember I turned back around one day, and I'm not going to curse, even though I did it already a little bit. I was like, who the F are you calling the N? I said, I just let it rip. And you know, after that, hi, Carolyn, how you doing? I was like, that's all I had, because I just couldn't take it anymore. But it stayed with me for years after that, my own insecurity of, you know, the question of what does it mean to be black? What does it mean? Am I black enough? If I straighten my hair, am I black? If I like a certain kind of music, am I black? If I date somebody who's white. When I walked down the streets of New York City, I used to be married for about 8 years to a white British guy. And this was in the 80s. And when we're holding hands walking down the street, you know who gave me the hardest time? It wasn't the white people. And it was brutal for me. And I stopped holding hands. There was a way that it changed me, because I started thinking, are they right? Like, you know, I'm doing something against, like, what's happening here. You know, it's taken me a long time to come back around and understand, both have empathy for people who live in a country. Look, you know, by the time we hit the 60s, we had to be like Black is beautiful, Black power. We're trying to claim collectively who we are on our own terms. 2 black psychologists wrote a book called Black Rage, who also raised the question. They said, great, we grew our ledge about our possibilities as black people, but if you study French cinema, are you black enough? Because we also shrunk our ledge. And so for me, that fell over into the environment in the outdoors when I did all that backpacking in Nepal. And black people would say to me, oh, black people don't do that. What are you doing hiking in Nepal? And they'd say it with a sense of humor. So it was a different delivery. But for me, the message is still the same. And so the sense of, that's part of what the insecurity is, right? This is partly what internalized oppression looks like. You take cues from what are around you all the time, those you understand and those you do not. And most of us want to be accepted. Most of us want to connect. Most of us want to be part of a group. And most of us want to be free to make that decision for ourselves about who we are. But you're juggling that in so many different ways. You know, at another time, I could tell you the journey of my hair, which would actually be about race and my being comfortable with moving back and forth. At the end of the day, people should be able to do whatever they want with their hair. But I understand, as a black woman in America, it actually signifies something, whether I like it or not, or whether I even mean to or not. And I've been challenged over and over and over about that. So I understand. I love the idea that the white friends saw your daughter and was just like, they didn't even thought, she must be your daughter. Like, what do you mean she's adopted? But that also says something to me about a country that makes fun about adoption all the time. In every comedy movie, when the brother looks at the sister and say, they don't love you the same, you must be adopted. You must have come from they think it's funny. Only those of us who are adopted know it. There's nothing funny about that. Blood is thicker than water. We have so many ways of phrasing that familial connection and prioritizing and valuing it in a very particular way. So the minute you don't fit in there, I imagine that they were also saying that the gobsmacked might have also been, but we don't even, like, what does that mean? Because based on what we think that actually means, that means she's not connected to you in the same way, which I would argue is not true, but yeah. Yeah, I could continue, but I'll stop. Thank you for that.
Dr. Finney, my name's Jim.
Hi, Jim. I love that. Dr. Finney, everybody's so serious.
We got off on that start.
Yeah.
My question for you is,
Yes.
why do you think the Black Lives Matter movement has resonated and taken such a powerful hold? We've had plenty of incidents over many, many years that hasn't generated this kind of a response.
Yeah.
So.
That's a great question, and that's a question I've been thinking about and talking about. I mean, with different people, a lot of us are having that question. So this is just my opinion. I think that in no apparent order, I think we have the current administration. So when the current administration moved into the White House, I was living in Lexington, Kentucky. And I was in Lexington, Kentucky. I'm just saying, Lexington, Kentucky. Now, Lexington is a blue dot in a red state. It's how it defines itself politically. Lexington's 75% white. And I remember, for the first time in any visceral way, I felt the kind of fear, because I walked everywhere there. I walked to the university, I just walked everywhere there, because I was so obvious. I think the current administration, the language around race, the way that human beings were being talked about, the way that other aspects of our lives as human beings and Americans were being erased. So diversity was taken off common websites, there were climate change, there were things that were being moved around and said, and nobody seemed to be doing anything about it. And suddenly it was giving permission, not for people to create something that wasn't always there, but to be what they always were and say it out loud. So I think that atmosphere was created. I think that we had a pandemic, and I think that for those of us who were privileged to have a roof over our heads, suddenly we are at home. And so all those things that distract us and keep us going, we didn't have them in our lives. So what does it mean to be still? And I understand that not everybody has that privilege, but for those of us who can suddenly be at home and maybe watch the TV or read a book or have a conversation, it provided some space. Because like you said, George Floyd wasn't the first. And I'd like to say is the last, but we know that that's not true either, right? So I think that it came at that moment when I think we're collectively feeling incredibly vulnerable as people. We're feeling incredibly vulnerable as people who may identify as American. We are, we have shows like Hamilton kind of playing with those ideas, all this popular way within which we're having these conversations that are really different, that make it accessible to everybody in a very particular way. And we need somewhere to put all that energy. And for me, that's what Black Lives Matter has been around for a while. But I think that there was a way within which the murder of George Floyd was on video, and the way the policeman who killed him just looked. He looked devoid, actually, of any humanity. He looked devoid. And I know this may sound weird, where the bulk of my compassion and empathy is with George Floyd and George Floyd's family. I also have some empathy for that man, because what happens to you when you get there? He was looking at the camera like almost like a dare. Like it's like, what's going on behind there, right? I think that social media, this is a time when social media, boy, man, a lot of people are really good at it. So we can get the message out in very particular ways. I think that the anger that's been around for 400 years, that's been around for the last 20 years, that's been there for the last 4 years, is all bubbling up. Because all of that protesting we're seeing isn't all intentional and directed, right? A lot of it has almost a random feel, like it's an opportunity. It's opportunistic more than focused. I think that we have a climate change conversation that is also real. And I think that's the other thing. We're watching our lives. For me, there's no going back to what it was before. I'm sorry. We're in a new phase of something, and a lot of it we don't know what it is. And that's a lot of uncertainty. I've been depressed. I get very stressed. I don't sleep as well as I used to. I know I'm not alone, and thinking that I'm an optimistic, happy person by nature, but, my worst part of the day is actually when it's time to go to bed, and I stay up really, really late. Like I'm up to 1, 2. I'm binge watching. Money Heist is my latest from Spain. It's great. Anything so that I don't have to think about it, because I'm thinking about it all the time. So this is what I think, all of this. And I also there's a part of me that's so exhilarated by it. As a person who does this work for a living, I'm just like, I don't even know. I can't keep up with the emails. People are, I don't know you all well enough to make that joke, so I'm not going to. But I had to stop myself there. I think there's the potential is so incredible. The potential. And there's a lot of loss, and there's going to be a lot more loss, right? How do we hold each other with that? I have empathy for, I say to people I know well who are white, I said, the thing that I know I can never fully understand, what it means to be in your shoes and stand in a world where you've worked hard and you've been good. And now, yet again, but now we're saying we want all that. And we want to break it down. We want to take it down. Reparations. In the hardest way. I can't imagine what it must feel like to be on the other side, be in that. Because I'm not there. I'm over here going, reparate, not quite like that. But to be there. How scary that's got to be as a human being. And that's why I said that there's more loss coming, but I think there's something really on the other side of that. I mean, if we want it bad enough, do we want it bad enough? That's why I tell everybody, I said, if you're comfortable, you're not doing the work. I can just be blunt. If you are comfortable, you are not doing the work. That doesn't mean you shouldn't feel some sense of security and safety. That's not what I'm saying. But there is nothing comfortable about this. There is nothing comfortable about it. I can't think of when I've ever been really comfortable anyway, even when I've been having fun. How many times I get invited to a room where most of the people don't look like me, who don't know me, and how many times, what it's meant, the gymnastics I often have to do in my head to give people the benefit of the doubt when they've slighted me, when they've ignored me. I mean, all these things when they don't want to promote me. I have so many stories. I've lost my job because I've changed my hair. I have all those stories. I just do, and I'm not looking for anybody's pity, but to understand, it plays out in very real ways. So what I know is coming and what's here for a lot of people that may not have had to experience any of that before, you may have to experience some of that now. The difference is you don't have to do it alone. That's the beauty, and that's the work, right? What does that look like? It's not my job to fix it for you. But it's our job to think about how we want to move forward. And so for me, that means I've got to get to know you better, but you got to get to know me better. And if I say something you don't like, you don't turn away. Actually, if you stand with somebody you love, even when they piss you off, you might say, I need to take a break, because I need to take a break. I might say something here I might regret. But you come back. Because you care and because you love. That's what that looks like. It's not about having this beautiful kumbaya moment. It's about knowing that you're there and you've built that trust. And it's real. So I know if I'm going down, you're not going to let me go down on my own. You're not going to let it happen. And vice versa. Ooh, got me all emotional messing with me. Thanks. Oh, he's way over there. Sorry. Yes.
Hi, I'm Will.
Hi, Will.
So I go to a predominantly white institution, actually a rival of Middlebury, so very similar makeup.
I see. What school?
Hamilton College.
Yeah, I spoke there about a year ago.
And so much like a lot of these small liberal arts schools, they're pumping a lot of money into opportunity programs, trying to make the campuses more diverse, and along with that, creating a lot of spaces for students of color, international students, students of different demographics, like ethnic, racial. And I hear from some of my friends that have come to Hamilton through those opportunity programs that these spaces that they make are not conducive to assimilation, basically. And really speaks to, I think, a lot of what you said is kind of asking people to come to your table and learning everything about your table and not having a reciprocal relationship. So having had some experience at Middlebury, where I'm sure a lot of these things are going on as well, what do you think these predominantly white institutions can kind of do about these? Where do you find the balance between creating these spaces and also kind of changing the fabric and not just kind of taking these spaces, pushing them to the side, letting them be together, if you know what I mean?
When you say letting them be together, what do you mean?
Like the Black-led student union or groups like this, kind of just saying, you guys can go all have your club, but not actually weaving them into the fabric of the school and changing the way that the predominantly white institution operates.
Yeah, thank you, Will. That was a great question. So the reason I'm at Middlebury is for just this reason, right? So I left full-time academia 2 years ago. I left full-time academia because when I had been recruited in 2007 to UC Berkeley in their Department of Environmental Science, Policy, and Management, Department of 75, I was the only African American. I taught the largest class. I was the least paid. There was a lot about that was really hard. And when it came time for my tenure, the fight was 2 years. It was over my book. In the College of Natural Resources that had a $16 million endowment to do diversity and inclusion work. I brought in more African American doctoral students than anyone in the history of the department. I can say all this really fast to get to your question. So at a liberal, progressive, public institution. Right, so, and then University of Kentucky, and then I said, I like working with people in academic institutions, but for me to be whole and do the work, I have to step outside of it, because they say they want this thing, and then they get this thing, but then they don't want this thing, and they don't know what to do with this thing. So the dean of the Environmental Center at Middlebury College reached out to me last year and said, we'd love to have you come to Middlebury College, and I said, I don't want to be a full-time faculty. But if you and I can work on something, so for 6 months we came up with a proposal. I said, I'll be a scholar in residence, let's try 2 years, because they wanted to work on this stuff on the campus, which means that it would take time for me to find out what that is on that campus, and also support me as I do this work out in the world. So that for me was brilliant. And what it took in part was an individual in a position of power that was willing to take the risk, to find the funding, to make the case, because I knew they weren't going to listen to me on their own. But it took her, she had 22 years. So I often say to people, how do you leverage your power within the institution? And how do you do that in a way that makes space, not simply for you, but for the others? All the ideas that we talk about there that we say we want to amplify. And what does that mean to really amplify it? I think that, I'm of two minds, Will, so it depends on what day you ask me. So some days I think institutions, if they have enough people like that who are willing to challenge the status quo, who know where the money is and know how to negotiate that and make space for and fight for the groups, the individuals, the faculty, the staff, the students that need that, they're willing to risk their jobs and positions for that it could work. Other days, I sometimes think that the institutions just need to crumble. And what I mean by, I'm not trying to be, I'm not inciting violence. When I was at UC Berkeley, and this isn't meant to be political, but President Clinton came to give a talk, and I went to hear him speak. And the thing that stuck with me that he said at that time was that he said for developing countries, they need to focus on infrastructure. He said, that's their biggest challenge. But for us here in the United States, the biggest challenge is the rigidity of our institutions. And it's never more true for me than in this moment. And that's every single institution. An institution, by its very nature, is meant to perpetuate itself. Which doesn't mean you don't have great people working within the institution. It doesn't mean you don't have great ideas happening within an institution. But sometimes I just think it's a funny thing. It really is like hitting your head up against a brick wall. If you come in with something different, if you bring difference in to that institution, which was created without you in mind in the first place, unless you're talking about historical Black colleges, of course you're going to have problems. So for me, how do we address that? Is it about getting rid of the institution or finding those people who are willing to leverage it? Because the young people coming in, the new faculty, they're getting more vocal, they're getting better at saying these things and doing that work and challenging, but it's a lot of work. And their loss is going to be greater than the people who have the positions of power already. They do not have the position, and it shouldn't be all on them to do it. And not to say that they shouldn't do it. Said, I'm gonna walk away, I'll walk away from my job. Students can do it, faculty can do it, staff can do it, but it's harder if you don't have tenure. It's harder if you're just a student. It's harder for anybody to even listen to you unless you have allies, unless you have people who are standing with you, who are taking that risk. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Maya.
Hi, Maya.
As the sole Black person often in a room or at any PWI that I've attended my entire life, how do you go about holding those institutions accountable for their past, present, and probably future racist behavior, whether it be the institution itself or its members, especially when it's an institution that you care about very deeply?
Whoa! Who planted Maya? That's a great question. So, again, in no apparent order, I kind of do it as it comes up in my head. So how I do it, and I would suggest in many ways, is I get very clear about my own intention instead of intentions. And what I mean by that, when I was recruited to Berkeley, it was a real privilege. It opened up a lot of doors. I was so intimidated. How am I? I'm the only Black person in a staff, faculty staff of 75. I saw the writing on the wall that this was going to be really hard. I was up against a lot of things. And the first year I got pretty depressed. Because I came in like, this is what it's going to be, this is what it's going to do. You hired me, I told you what I do and I'm about. And then I got in and saw how quickly they tried to assimilate me and shrink me down. And so one of the things I just did was in my own mind. I just decided, and people thought I was just being cute, but I really wasn't when I would say, I don't work within the rules. I work in relationship to the rules. That actually, the reframing in my head gave me space. I didn't wait for them to give me my freedom. I decided what my freedom was going to be. I never say I'm an academic. I work in academia. I wasn't saying that to be cute. Because I said the problem was, if I say that, then I'm going to have to fit in a very particular way, which I don't. And I actually am not interested in. I want to be in relationship to. So how do you decide for yourself who you are in relationship to it, and repeat that? How do you get creative in terms of whatever your skill set and practice? So for me, it's communication, it's writing, it's communication, talking, working how I work, getting better and rigorous at how I bring those ideas and values to the way that I work. How do I make space for other people to do the same? How do I sometimes I call it sneaking it through the back door. I'm not saying directly what I'm doing, but this is what I'm doing, right? And how I'm doing it. And it's a day-to-day practice, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I didn't get tenure at Berkeley. After many people fought for me, after people protested, after there was a petition, and because I wasn't willing to change it, and I walked away from the job. So sometimes you have to be willing to walk away. And not walk away with your head bent down, walk away with your head up. And that's just the hard truth. Where are your allies? Who are they? How do you identify who they are? How do you take care of yourself? What does the self-care look like? Because when you're the only one in the room over and over again, it's exhausting. It's exhausting, it can be debilitating. You used to watch Dave Chappelle. I love the Dave Chappelle show. He used to do a skit where he would be the only black man in an office meeting. And then he would be acting like all of his white colleagues until suddenly one of his white colleagues just pissed him off. And then he would just, and the thing would come up at the bottom of the screen and it would say, "When keeping it real goes wrong." And those moments, so you keep yourself from coming to that moment where you just lose it. In also 2005, 2006, it was in upstate New York. What's the name of the institute there? It used to be an old monastery. There's an institute that does a lot of environmental work. As groups you can come in, but it has a spiritual component. I'm just blanking on the name because all of you, this isn't far away. They were having an invitation only. They invited 40 environmentalists. And the environmentalists were people, some of them you'd recognize their names. They ran major environmental nonprofits. There were representatives from Yale, Harvard, lots of people who were established, the Park Service. And I had gotten a call. I was still a student, a doctoral student. They said, "Would you want to come?" And I said, "Oh, sure," because everything relates to my dissertation. So I said, "Sure." I thought this would just be interesting, this 3-day meeting. The meeting was by invitation only for them to talk about themselves as the environmental movement, as a liberal and progressive movement. How do they become more diverse? How do they expand that? That was the focus of the meeting. Okay, I'm going to say again, right? Invitation only, established people, talk about diversity. I get there, and I'm the student. There's one other student, a young white woman, so the least powerful people in the room. The first night, there's a whole group of us in a circle, and the monastery is really beautiful, and there was a big gold Buddha behind us, and we're doing introductions. And I look around the circle, and I am the only person of color in the room for 3 days, right? So as the introductions are going around, and I'm getting more and more nervous, because I'm like, what am I going to say, what am I going to say, what am I going to say, what am I going to say? By the time it gets to me, I mumbled something fairly lame, but I pointed to it. And the only one to say anything was a dude from Scotland who went, "Right on, sister," literally. Over the next 3 days, the people running it said, "Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to have breakout sessions around different subject matters. What ideas should we be talking about?" And somebody said, "We should be talking about racism, homophobia, sexism. Carolyn, can you run that group?" I thought, oh, okay, I can do it for just today. There's other things I want to go to. There was something on soil and soul that looked really cool, and but I can do that for today. Over the next 3 days, they kept asking me to run the group on racism, homophobia, and sexism. Now, I'm not saying there isn't anything I need to learn, but I'm just saying I believe I was probably the last person in the room who needed to be in that group for 3 days. I was getting angrier and angrier, but afraid to speak up because I was intimidated. By the third day, the guy running things said, "So, it's our last day together. Let's talk about what groups here, what subjects we think are most important that we're going to continue on after the meeting is over. For those of you who think the racism, homophobia, and sexism group is really important, you should come over here and sit next to Carolyn." And this wonderful white guy, a friend of mine, Andy Pitts, came over and sat next to me. And nobody else came over. And the white guy running the thing went. And then they filled up all the other groups. And then he finally, in front of everybody, came over to me and said, "Carolyn, you know what? Forget about this group. Why don't you come join us over here in communications?" And that's when keeping it real went wrong. I just got angry. I started crying. I was like stereotype black woman getting angry and crying. All the white people in the room were like mortified. You just saw like everything, and I didn't even know what I said, right? It just, because I was like, for 3 days, y'all, for 3 days. Then everybody caucused. Then it was for 45 minutes, we had the caucus, and then we're all gonna come back together. And somebody said, had the presence of mind to say, "It's actually not your job to run this." And I'm like, too late now, I wanna ask the question. And went around the room, and the powerful thing was, everybody in that room, people who run organizations, who had significant privilege, said, "We saw what was going on, didn't want to be uncomfortable, didn't want to bring it up, didn't feel like being uncomfortable, didn't want to bring it up." It just went around the room. There were Buddhist practitioners there, so Buddhist teachers. One dude was crying, and I never want to be happy at somebody's tears, but I was like, I made that grown man cry. Because like, y'all practicing Buddhism, what kind of Buddhism is this? And so really what it revealed to me in that moment also was that not just how the very elephant in the room, which was huge and supposed to be the focus of the conference, and the way power plays out, but how I was also complicit. Yes, I was intimidated, but I let it go on for 3 days, right? So also, what can you do for yourself so that doesn't happen? When you find yourself in a situation, it's all right for you to walk away. You don't owe anybody anything, you know? And for you to meet people where they are, you have to be able to take care of yourself first. And this is hard. I say this because it's way easier to tell you to do it, Maya, than to tell myself. Right, to understand what does that really look like. Because you might lose. You might lose a friendship, you might lose membership in that group, somebody might not hire you, they may not want to work with you anymore, they may talk badly about you, all the things. And then what somebody told me was, it's none of your business what anybody else thinks about you. It is none of your business what anybody else thinks about you. So there's something about developing that grounding, which doesn't mean that you treat people badly, which doesn't mean that you treat people with any less humanity than you want. But coming from that place and keeps it authentic and real, it keeps me grounded in who I am. I can say, you know, I don't want to do that, but I can tell you in such a way that I don't have to make you feel like crap the way you made me feel like crap in order to make myself okay. That's the best I can give you right now. Later, chapter 2.
I have a loud voice. I can just do this. Hi, I'm Izzy.
Hi, Izzy.
So, I mean, I grew up here. Most of us grew up here. It's my 12th summer at camp and in this institution. And the way that this institution runs generally is that a lot of the staff members are people who have been here as a camper, as a child, growing up. And New England, New Hampshire tends to be a pretty white space generally. And so as we start having these conversations about how to make this place more welcoming for so many more kids, but knowing that that process is going to take a while as we enter more kids into that system that don't look like the vast majority of staff, so that hopefully in the future it'll look like a lot more diverse place, and it will be a lot more diverse place. I'm just curious how we can now, as an organization, be welcoming to those children who are coming from different backgrounds and honestly only have a Maya or a couple people on staff to kind of look up to, not as just a role model, but as someone who also looks like them and maybe comes from a similar experience as they do.
Yes. So, you know, one of the things that I think is true is, and you may already know this, I don't want to discount what you may already have in terms of a generosity of heart, an openness of mind, things like having fun with play, being creative, being in the outdoors. I mean, I think those are something we can all tap into no matter where we're from and who we are, right? And so there's something, it's not as though suddenly none of that means anything anymore if you're talking about a brown or black kid, right? You know, right? It's not what that means. For me, it's partly what happens. How do you recognize if and when one of those kids is in a situation that they seem to be struggling? And what does struggle look like for them? How is there a space of trust so that they have someone to share that with? You don't have to know exactly what they're experiencing, but to be able to recognize that and sometimes sneak it through the back door about how you provide support for that. So what's the self-education that needs to happen that has nothing to do with that kid before they arrive here? So you can kind of know what that might be. There's a larger conversation about, I mean, I went to YMCA day camp, I loved it. In part, I went to it because there was no way that my father was going to let me go to sleepaway camp, which was really what I wanted. But I loved going there every summer. It felt like a sort of type of freedom. And I loved my camp counselors anyway. It's really funny. The woman who was my camp counselor, her name was Kathy, but who I remember is the male counselor, George Jamgoshen. You know, you remember names, and I just remember because I thought he was really cute, and he was always hanging out too, George. There's something about I don't know, there's something about what does it mean to bring kids, where are we bringing them from into a space that's embedded in a very particular way in a place's history? Not that you shouldn't do it. I'm just saying, what does that actually mean? I don't know if that's ever been interrogated in terms of what that looks like. What's the experience? You know, when I went to junior high school at the Homics, I was a Mamaroneck in Larchmont, and Larchmont has a lot of money. The public high school had a lot of money. I went to high school with Matt Dillon. Those are my bona fides. And in 7th grade, the junior high was amazing. It had a swimming pool. This was in the early 70s, man, so it was gym classes. I mean, one of the first things I learned how to do, and the hardest test I've ever taken in my entire life, was when I had to tread water for 45 minutes. I still remember it. It was brutal. That clock was ticking real slow. I did it, I remember. And so there was all these things. I was exposed to these creative programs that I wouldn't have gotten maybe if I had lived somewhere else, just even because I happened to be a black kid who lived on this estate that my parents had a job, and so I got exposed to the school system that had this stuff. But I also remember very clearly when they pulled all the black kids in full view of everybody else out of all the classrooms for us to line up in the hallways and take a bus to go get tested for sickle cell anemia. Now, I remember that because that was some bizarre stuff. Like that just had a weird feeling, the sense of separation, you know, based on something that was a health concern, but it was very particular, you know. And I wonder if they just didn't know how another better way to do it. You know, it's not that we shouldn't have been tested for sickle cell anemia, but boy, talk about separating out the black kids from everybody else. So I think about that for these programs, knowing nothing about this program and the wonderful things that it must do. You know, where are those places that we can kind of look at that you might not have noticed before that have had no ill intention, but might have a different kind of impact on those black and brown students who come in? And I think there's nothing that can replace, you know, that relationship, just the relationship. I still remember damn George, Jam Goshen. That's crazy, right? But I had a great time. My camp counselors were amazing. And it didn't matter that they were white, which didn't mean that there were aspects of that experience that didn't stand out for me differently. I hope that was easy. Oh, that's right, she had her hand up.
So, I often...
What's your name?
Mary.
Mary.
I often feel the conversation is overwhelming.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, is the conversation getting broader or more narrow? And what I'm thinking about in particular is I have a niece who's Korean. She was adopted. Mm-hmm. She had experiences that I think probably many black people had as children. And she's struggling as an adult looking now. Is the Black Lives Matter movement narrowing or opening a conversation for all of those people, all of us who in one way or another have had those really narrowing life experiences?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I want to offer another way to frame it. So instead of thinking of narrowing or widening the conversation, it's a focusing the conversation. So think of it as a ball, you know, multidimensional, not a ball, but something that's got multidimensional sides, right? And that if I stand over here, this is what I'm going to see, this is what I see, which doesn't make it any less real, but this is where I stand. So this is kind of where I have to come from authentically and how I have to address where I stand. And someone else may stand over here, and they're just focused over here because this is real and authentic. And so for me, it is not about denying any of those experiences, and they all don't have to fit under one umbrella in order for it to make sense. You know, so I think we have the capacity as human beings to be complex about how we do our work, where we show up, how we are in relationship across difference. What I imagine to be true is the feeling of oppression, the feeling of being isolated because of your difference is something that a lot of people have experienced, regardless of what that difference is. I think the conversation in the United States about race, we have privileged it as a black and white conversation. It does not make it wrong. It just, we have privileged that in part because for me, one of the first two truths is that we enslaved a group of people. And so those consequences of that are very different than any other group of people. Now, what's for me almost bigger than that conversation is the conversation about American Indians, right? So they don't even show up in the broader conversation unless we are very particular about that. I mean, something that I would have liked to have known or said if I had known is what land, whose land was this first? How do we honor that? So there's something about, and for perhaps the person who is Korean, there's a whole history of different Asian peoples coming over here and their experience. There is definite history. The uniqueness of that history is important to value and understand. So, I mean, one of the categories I don't like to use is people of color. I kind of twitch because what it does, I think what it's trying to do is unite, but it's not a whole lot different for me than sort of whitewashing. It just takes away the difference because it's easier. And actually that serves nothing. Actually, I think we have to get better at embracing the difference. To understand that we can have commonality, you and I as women can have commonality. And we should absolutely, we can connect on that and we can use that, we can lean onto that. That doesn't mean that we don't have differences, not just racial differences, geographic differences, just our experiences. I don't know you even, I'm acting like I know you, right? Like there's all kinds of ways that we're different. And so for me, it's how do we hold that? Black Lives Matter was formed for very particular reasons. Because the thing we see more than anybody else is the killing of black people and the treatment of black people for 400 years. I just want to keep saying it because I'm not saying it hasn't happened to people who are of Asian descent. It has, actually. I spent 3 years going to Japan and teaching for a month with Japanese students who could speak English, and I loved Japan. And I would go over, and my job, the class I taught was looking at the history of culture and natural resource management in the United States. And I did it through the lens of 5 different ethnic groups, Asians broadly defined, but I get particular Chinese, Japanese, Korean, South Asian, African Americans, Native people, and New Mexicans. There was Latinx people in New Mexico. And when I talked about the Japanese and Japanese internment, I had taught this class at Berkeley for a number of years. I was used to telling this story. And when I stood in front of 15 Japanese, and I was embarrassed as an American that I had to say this to them. I got emotional. I was like, what's happening right now? I'm getting emotional. And they told me, I said, did you all know about Japanese internment? They said, oh yeah, we kind of heard about it in school. They had a wholly different connection to it than I did. But I, for the first time, outside of the country, as an American, formed a different connection to what it meant in terms of my own culpability as an American, what we did to Japanese people at that time, which didn't mean I wasn't still black with my own, but I'm black, and when that was happening, it was Jim Crow segregation, and that was true if I was, alive, but it doesn't change the other thing. For me, it's the same as John Muir can be thoughtful, committed to non-human nature. He was, he was. And he was racist. He had some particular ideas about black and Native people. He changed his ideas of Native people over time. Not so much around black people as I understand it. We can hold that. So my thing is if I was up here with this person who's of Korean descent, for me, it would be a really interesting conversation about where things have been similar and where things have been different. Where does she stand around that ball, And how we can spend some time looking and learning and engaging with that over there, and also make time for what's over here on this side. Was that a good answer?
And that's why it's so overwhelming.
And that's it. And that's why it's overwhelming. That's why it's exhausting. That's why I said there's nothing comfortable about it. I mean, it is. Human beings, man, we're exhausting. We're overwhelming. We can be a big pain in the ass. Come on. I mean, look, we're just, as people, you know. But it doesn't make it any less worthy of our attention and our time. What else are we here for anyway? Yeah, I'm gonna start preaching. What time is it? We are really rocking and rolling. Okay, but we gotta let him ask one more question. Sorry, I didn't realize what time it was. But see, when you sit here when there's an audience, I will keep standing talking.
Just to piggyback on the gentleman back there, when he made a comment or asked a question about the BLM movement, and thinking about a confluence of things and events that sort of boil to this point, I just want to say that I am grateful for the man in Oval Office, because had he not gone there, we probably would not have the privilege of seeing what the experience of us has been for over years.
Yeah.
Because of his presence, because of his behavior, because of what he says, what he does, how he handles the office, it's brought things to light in ways that we would probably never have been privileged to see. So I'm just grateful for his presence in the office. As bad as it may be to some, I have to look at his being there as an opportunity for all of us to see what the reality is that we have to face. And I think because he's there, that has amplified what is going on and is helping to keep us moving forward.
Yes, and I truly appreciate that, and I also, in my more optimistic moments, see everything that's happening now as an opportunity. And I never want us to forget, and I never want to forget, that people are still dying because of it. And so it comes at a price, the opportunity. And if we're not doing anything with the opportunity, you know, ...